if back then me could have a 15-minute conversation with today me, it would have saved me 6 figures. You know what I mean?
Welcome to the Freedom Point Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about creating more time freedom through passive real estate investing. Passive investing in real estate challenges conventional investment wisdom. We are passionate about learning and sharing resources with others who are ready to transform their investing mindset. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer, ADP. I'm glad you're here. Now let's dig in.
All right, welcome back, Freedom Point podcast listeners. I'm your host, Jeremy Dyer. Thank you again for jumping into another episode of the Freedom Point. I've got a wonderful guest with me today, Jordan Berry from Laundromat Resource. Jordan was a pastor for 15 years and transitioned out of ministry into buying a laundromat. He then decided to share the hard-earned and expensive experiences that he learned with a blog that he started and a YouTube channel. And then he was on a quest to find out the best laundromat owners in the space, bring them together, how they effectively and efficiently operated their businesses. He started a podcast on interviewing laundromat owners and other industry professionals. These platforms then all converged, from what I understand, into Laundromat Resource, which is an education and a community platform for laundromat owners and future laundromat owners. Jordan, this is one space that my audience is not yet familiar with. And so first of all, before we get started, welcome to the show.
Hey, you know what? Thanks for having me here. It's a huge honor. And man, I feel like that intro pretty much just sums it up. I think we can just... brush
There's
it off.
no way that I hit on everything, because I told you before we even started, Jordan, this is one thing or one investment area. And you're referring to it really as a passive investment, but this is really one area that I myself am completely unfamiliar with, other than the fact that I know that there's some franchise brands, that are out there trying to grow, the book of franchise owner operators. So I'm sure there's a lot more value that you've got to bring to our listening audience today.
Oh yeah, we can definitely dig into the weeds. And I will say, just right up front, I would not say that this is entirely passive. This is a business, right? There are no entirely passive businesses, but you definitely can set them up. On the scale of completely passive to completely active, you can definitely heavily weigh them towards that passive side of the scale. So, just for clarity's sake, and I want to make sure that we're communicating accurate information today.
Yeah, absolutely. So why laundromat? There's so many other investment opportunities out there, from a passive sense or a semi-passive, investment sense. Why the laundromat asset class specifically?
Well, if we want to just cut right to it here, the big draws of laundromats are they're a high cash flow business. And just to kind of give you, we can dig into this a little bit more if you want to, but just kind of give you numbers up front. A typical base hit laundromat, you're looking at a 20 to 25% return on your money before utilizing any leverage, so loans or anything like that. So those numbers can actually go up pretty significantly with, appropriate usage of leverage. So that's a huge draw in and of itself. It's tough to beat the cash flow of laundromats. But also, like I was saying before, they tend to lean, especially, on the business spectrum, they tend to lean pretty heavily, or at least can lean pretty heavily on the passive side. So the general concept is cash flow coming in, not tied to your income, which is what, really that's what we're talking about when we're talking about financial freedom. When you're looking to leave your 9-to-5 job, what you're looking for is cash flow that's not tying up your time. And that's, I think, what laundromats can provide better than most asset classes that I know, if not all.
So most laundromat owners are these people that are, maybe in their 30s, 40s, 50s. They've got an active day job. They're crushing their W-2 year in and year out. And they're looking to diversify. Maybe they're investing into alternative investments while at the same time investing into something that pays regular, consistent risk adjusted cash flow. Is that kind of the genesis? These aren't people that are necessarily looking to exit the W-2 today, but rather they're looking to build up a business so that they have an exit plan in place in the next 5, 10 or plus years.
So yeah, some. Here's what's funny about this business, right? Is it's such a simple business. People pay you to do the work of cleaning their clothes with your machines. Like, it's so simple. But the way that this business can be set up is almost as diverse as the number of laundromats that there are, right? And so, again, there's a ton of people who do exactly what you're talking about. They're trying to, they'll buy a couple smaller laundromats, trying to get to a point where they can leave their 9 to 5 or just supplement their income or whatever. There's, one of the things that's amazing about laundromats is, I got really into like all the podcasts about like financial freedom through real estate investing. And I was like, yes, I'm so on board with this. And then I started just kind of like putting the numbers together in my head. And I'm like, if I'm looking at like $200 a door, like that's a lot of doors I need to buy in order to replace my fairly modest income. Right. But with laundromats, I mean, probably 99% of incomes in America can be replaced by 1 to 3 laundromats, right? So there's a lot of people who, if you can get in the right way, it doesn't work for everybody, but if you can get in the right way at the right laundromat, you can buy one and leave your 9 to 5 job. In fact, that's a big part of how I got into this business. Was a friend of the family who worked tech jobs 70, 80 hours a week in the San Francisco Bay Area, bought a laundromat, replaced his income, and was working 5 hours a week. And I was like, well, that sounds awesome. I'll just do that. Right. And so we got people doing that for sure. But what's interesting about laundromats is you can also build up a really big business. I've got plenty of friends who have multi-million-dollar laundromat businesses. Right. And you can stay on the self-serve side, or you can add service side of it with pickup and delivery, drop off laundry, and, now you can build up a really big business that way. So it's pretty diverse in how you can run it. So that makes the owner pool pretty diverse also.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking about the first time that you got into this business, maybe kind of walk us through, that transition from pastoral ministries into, owning your very first laundromat, and what did that experience look like?
Yeah, well, I love to tell you that it was a great transition and everything went smooth. And it was rough, man. It was very rocky. So, we made the decision to, leave ministry as a job. I was trying to figure out, what do I do with my life now? I've been doing ministry for a long time. I don't really have any other skill sets. Like, what do I do? Right. So I was kicking around all kinds of stuff. And then this family friend, we heard about and talked with him a little bit. And so we're like, okay, laundromat. So, we went about trying to do some research, but this was almost a decade ago now, and there really wasn't a whole lot of information out there at the time. And really didn't know where to get information. So I ended up relying almost entirely on the broker who was selling me the laundromat. Big mistake number one. And it turned out that broker did not have my best interest in mind, but he introduced me to a laundromat that I ended up buying. And I'll try to give you some numbers if that's intriguing to you.
It's intriguing to me.
Okay. So I bought this one. This is what we call in the business a zombie mat. And a zombie mat's basically a fixer-upper. Half the machines are broken, lights are flickering on and off, cockroaches crawling across the floor, or whatever. So this is essentially a fixer-upper. I ended up buying it all cash, I think $65,000 or $70,000. And then so I bought that cash, and then I did 100% financing on equipment. And I put in, I don't know, somewhere around $150,000 of equipment at that time. And essentially had the Field of Dreams business model, the if you build it, they will come business model. But what I found when I took over, so the broker basically said, hey, look, we don't need to do a whole lot of due diligence. We know this thing's not making money. It's breaking even. And I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. He's like, here's what the numbers are going to look like when you put the new equipment in. And those numbers look amazing. And so I was like, yeah, that looks awesome. All right, sounds good. And so we didn't do any due diligence, but it turns out it wasn't breaking even. It was losing money, and it was losing a lot of money. And then I added new equipment, which means I had a loan payment. So even though business did grow pretty significantly, the baseline starting point was not very high. So significant growth was still not enough. So I lost a couple grand a month plus for 2 years. And that pro forma told me I was going to be making $5 or $6 grand net. So that's a, $7,000-8,000 swing punch to the gut, that I was experiencing. And it was rough. It was painful for sure.
So what were the lessons learned? I mean, obviously, you didn't give up, you didn't quit, even though you were, hemorrhaging, $2,000 a month, on your very first laundromat acquisition, which didn't end up turning out the way that you wanted it to. Fast forward to today, however many years later, clearly you've doubled and tripled down on the strategy. So what were those lessons learned?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I think the big ones that I learned for sure was, number one, don't rely on the broker solely. If back then me could have a 15-minute conversation with today me, it would have saved me 6 figures. You know what I mean? Like, and one of the big things I would have told myself is like, hey, do not buy anything. No asset class. Don't buy any business or investment until you find somebody who's already done it, who can help you, get that first one at least under your belt. Would have just saved me a ton of money. So that was a big one. Another thing that happened was I was losing all this money. And so I put all this money into this laundromat, right? I'm like $220,000 or whatever dollars into this laundromat. And so I put all this money into this laundromat, and I put $0 into rehabbing the reputation of the laundromat, which it turns out is pretty important and is much more difficult to do than to rehab the actual laundromat.
Yeah. So
right?
This isn't just rebranding. This is also changing the reputation of the location in the community.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it had a really bad reputation. I mean, I don't want to scare people because this is not a typical experience, but it had become like gang turf, and it was craziness there for a little while. But, I was losing all this money. And so instead of like pushing forward and really trying to let people know, like I put all this money into the laundromat, but then I didn't put any money into telling people I did that. Right. So people didn't know. And I turtled up. I got scared. I turtled up. I'm like, money's going out. I can't do any marketing because that's more money going out, and I don't know if it's coming back. And it was a hurdle I could not get across. And so, I mean, that's another huge one, right? Like don't put a bunch of money into a business and then not reserve any money to market that business and let people know what you're doing over there. So that was a huge lesson learned too.
So what are the typical financials, look like for somebody that maybe is looking to, invest, not passively, because there's certainly an active ownership, aspect of, owning a laundromat location. But what are the financials typically look like, understanding that people listening to this podcast are located all over the country, and even in Canada. So what does that typically look like? On average, a successful laundromat owner, what are they looking to get out of that asset?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is what I think is just so intriguing about laundromats, right? Is that, and we kind of already mentioned, like, when you're buying a laundromat, really what you're buying, unless you're buying a fixer upper, one that's not making money, either losing money or breaking even. When you're buying a laundromat, what you're buying is a cash flow, right? This is a cash flow business, which is why I think, if your goal is to leave that 9-to-5 job or to achieve financial freedom, this is something like a laundromat is probably one of your best ways to go, especially if you're trying to get out sooner rather than later. Because, again, your cash flow returns, you're looking at 20 to 25%. return on your money. And that's for just a base hit deal, right? And that's without leverage. And so you can see how, if your average real estate cash flow, maybe 10% if you're doing pretty good. And if you're doubling or more than that without even factoring in leverage with a laundromat, you're just going to achieve those numbers a lot quicker. So you're doing that. So I would, I like to kind of compare, because a lot of people are interested in real estate. So, when it comes to like cash flow, I think laundromats are, it's tough to beat laundromats on the cash flow. Real estate, okay, but really doesn't touch laundromats. When it comes to tax benefits, I'd give a slight edge to real estate, but there's a lot of tax benefits also to owning laundromats, which is another huge perk of these things. And then when it comes to equity, I'd give for sure real estate the edge there in terms of building equity over long term. You can build equity in laundromats also, but it just builds quicker. It tends to build quicker with real estate.
Let's talk about some of the resources where people can go if they want to learn more about, laundromat ownership, specifically about, how to identify, a location, where to go to find, the best resources available in the market to be able to execute, a business plan, right? When they go find that laundromat location that does have the cockroaches running around the floor, that's in a less than, fit location. Let's talk about where can people go to learn more about the strategy?
Well, I mean, listen, if you're looking for resources on laundromats, there's really no other place to go than to laundromatresource.com, Laundromat Resource podcast, all that stuff, right? But I mean, in all seriousness, there's a ton of free information. You can just Google or Yahoo if you're into that, Laundromat Resource, and you'll find us, or laundromatresource.com, all the platforms, everything, YouTube, social, all that stuff, right? Tons of free information and also tons of free tools to help you in like your valuation, in your due diligence, process, there. And we even have a free course. It's a high level sort of free course on how to buy your first laundromat. And it's 3 lessons. The first one will tell you how to find that laundromat, which is easier said than done right now. It's a little bit of a tight market. Demand is high. Inventory is low, similar to real estate. The second lesson will tell you how to actually value a laundromat. And then the third lesson will walk you through some things you can do to perform due diligence and verify the information the seller's giving you, which also is easier said than done in this business. And where can my listening audience go to find this again? So laundromatresource.com for sure. And then we do have like if you're at a point where you're like, okay, I'm sold on laundromats. I'm going in and I want to know everything I need to know, right? To buy this first laundromat and to do it right the first time, right? And that is like the key, because returns are so high on laundromats. If you just get a base hit and do it right the first time, sky's the limit for you. You've got a lot of flexibility on what you can scale up. You can put cash flow into real estate, whatever your goals are, they'll be easier to reach. If you just get that first one under your belt and you do a base hit at least there. So if you're ready to do that, right, then there is, we have a comprehensive course that's going to take you through everything you need to know. That knowledge is hard-earned knowledge from me personally. And, I have a podcast where I interview, owners and industry experts. So there's a ton of knowledge that comes out of that that's put into this course. And then obviously like relationships I have in the industry just in general. And I'm on the broker side of laundromats. So you're getting that angle too. But it's not just all the information. It's also, you get access to all the sort of premium tools that you need in order to, properly value and properly perform your due diligence on a laundromat through that course. And if that's something that you're interested in, then go to laundromatresource.com/freedom point and we'll get you a link to that special for you.
Sounds good. And we will also put that link in our show notes. So I appreciate you sharing that information with the audience. Jordan, I'd like to get personal on you for a minute here. Mm-hmm. And that is, how have your priorities changed in your life as you've gotten older?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's kind of an interesting one to think about, actually, because, there's not a lot of overlap between being a pastor and being a laundromat owner. I mean, strangely, there is some, but not a lot, right?
And like the cockroaches, maybe.
Yeah, exactly, like the cockroaches. Yeah. But what's interesting about business ownership in general and this whole kind of concept of financial freedom, which was brand new to me when we decided to buy a laundromat. I had never even heard of the term financial freedom. I knew nothing about business or investing or any of that. And I learned all that stuff after the fact, which is why things probably went so bad early on. But one of the interesting things about getting to that point where you don't have to rely on that 9 to 5 to pay the bills and that stuff, is that freedom aspect is nice, that you don't have to rely on that for finances. But what I have found, at least for me, is that it's really opened up my life and to be able to think bigger and differently, right? Like I can think a little bit more about like, hey, how do I want to raise my kids in a way that, number one, I still want them to, be caring, kind people, that are looking to serve other people, right? Like that's still a value. None of that stuff's changing, right? But I also want them to have sort of that same freedom, and I want them to be able to be to know people who can help them achieve bigger dreams than even I knew was possible, right? And so it's affected the way that I parent a little bit. And one of the things we talk about with our kids is like, our kids like all the same things, right? As all the kids, they like watching stuff on the phones or the tablets, right? Playing the video games. And, one of the things we really stress is you cannot just consume. You have to also contribute. And what that looks like can be a variety of things, right? So my daughter has her own little YouTube channel and she's trying to figure that out. And she's got almost 200 subscribers. So go her, like she's doing awesome. And my son has tried different things. He had a website that he built himself. He's 12 and he had a YouTube channel for a little bit. So he's tried some different stuff. He started a radio station for Laundromat Resource, right? But kind of all of that this financial freedom has just kind of opened up my mind a little bit and opened up the possibilities a little bit to be able to think bigger, to be able to try things that I wouldn't try otherwise. It changes you. Like it does change you.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really appreciative that you shared what you just shared with my listening audience, on, not just consuming, but also contributing. And that, speaking of your pastoral ministries, that's really a God-given gift, that he gave all of us. And that was to go create, right? To become a better version of ourselves, to give back. We have a work to do, right? So all of that things are things that it was designed to work that way. So really appreciate that. So speaking of kids, now let's go back to your 18-year-old self. If you could be 18 again, or at some point you're going to have an 18-year-old, what type of advice would you give yourself if you could go back again?
Yeah, that's a good question, because a lot of things I wouldn't do differently. Like it was great until I bought that first laundromat, really. And then it was rough for a little while. Now it's great again. Sure. So, I think the biggest piece of advice I would give myself is like, keep doing what you're doing, but also take some chances, like try different things, fail at different things. Like I was that kid growing up who's afraid to fail at anything, right? I got a B+ in junior high one semester and I cried for like 2 days straight, right? Like I did not like failing at anything. And now my mind is completely shifted on that because I've seen the power of failure. And like so many of us, we're like afraid of failure, right? That keeps us from taking the actions that we need to take in order to achieve the things we want in life. And so many of us stay stuck in a rut, and doing the same things over and over because we're afraid to take a step and do that. However, my camera just went, but I'll just keep rolling with it and see if I can get it going. Sure. However, that failure, especially early on when you don't have a whole lot of responsibility, you don't have kids of your own that are relying on you. You don't have, all the things that, hold us up when we get a little bit older, right? Spouse, kids, mortgage, bills, like all that stuff, right? Take more chances when you don't have those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I would give myself that exact same piece of advice. It's amazing, the lessons that I've learned through the failures and the trials and the tribulations. So if I could go back and tell my 18-year-old self something, I would say something very similar to that. And that's the time in your life where you need to take risks, because, the outcome of making a bad decision doesn't have as great of an impact then. But the crazy thing is when you get, kind of to be our age, so to speak, and I don't even know how old you are, nowadays it seems like I'm more risk tolerant than I even was, back in my teenage years and early 20s. So yeah, I really appreciate that. What's one or two ways that you personally use your talents to give back, whether that's, personally or professionally?
Yeah. So, I think, Laundromat Resource kind of in general is one of those things. Like, my goal is to help people achieve, financial freedom through laundromat ownership, but that vision has really expanded. And one of the things that's cool about laundromats is that they're one of the few community gathering spots left that we have, right? And a lot of times they're in these lower income kind of communities. And so, really, if the way you manage your laundromat business can really impact a community. And so there's an opportunity for us as laundromat owners to be able to change like vast numbers of communities in our country. And so the vision for Laundromat Resource, yes, is to help people achieve their financial freedom and their financial goals, and to get that, cash flow that they need to leave their job or whatever their goal is, right? But really, the real goal behind the goal is to transform communities and to infuse value and to infuse worth into these communities that don't always receive that message.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point there. What's the next bucket item on Jordan's list?
Well, that's a great question. I'm in sort of the midst right now of thinking about what it would look like to really scale up a big laundromat portfolio. And that's having some conversations around that. I think that is more doable now than it's ever been before with the technology that we have available to us now. And so just, kicking around that idea to see if maybe that's something that I can either initiate or be a part of at least. So.
That's great. Well, we're familiar with your website, laundromatresource.com. What are maybe one or two other ways that our audience can connect with you to learn more?
Yeah. So my email is Jordan, Jordan, at laundromatresource.com. It's Laundro. A lot of people put the Y in there. It's an O. Laundromatresource.com. So Jordan at laundromatresource.com. So definitely shoot me an email if I can do anything to help you out. YouTube is another great kind of platform for us. I think we're just at Laundromat Resource. There you can search it on YouTube. It's all over there. And then, we're on all the social platforms. So feel free to slide into our DMs on the social platforms too.
Jordan, I've really appreciated the time today. So thank you for joining us on the show.
Oh, it was a pleasure to meet you and to be on the show. So I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. And listening audience, thank you again for jumping into another episode of the Freedom Point podcast. Look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the Freedom Point podcast, powered by Starting Point Capital. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Freedom Point podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. If you're interested in connecting, you can find contact information at startingpointcapital.com.